So in the last two shiurim, we basically learned the beginning of the Rebbe's Maamar Tafshin Hatzvi-Bais, where the Rebbe basically summarizes the Maamar of Basi Legani of the Frierdiker Rebbe through Perek Yud Aleph, through chapter 11. What we'll do now is we'll learn one more paragraph from the Rebbe's Maamar, which is Ois Beis of the Maamar Tafshin Hatzvi-Bais, which is really, it's not so much a review of the Maamar before, but it's a hakdama, it's a preface that the Rebbe gives to chapter 12. Before getting in to any of the details of chapter 12, that will begin in Ois Gimel, Siv Gimel. So we'll learn Beis, then we'll go back to the original Maamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and we'll learn half of Ois Yud Beis in the original Maamar, and then we will continue with the Rebbe's Biur in Ois Gimel of the Maamar Tafshin Hatzvi-Bais. So says the Rebbe, Mamshich Levayer, after the Rebbe summarizes the first 11 chapters, specific Yud Beis, Hashayach L'Shnas Hilula Yud Beis. So now, we're getting ready to learn the 12th chapter. And the 12th chapter is the chapter that corresponds to the year that the Rebbe said this Maamar, in Tafshin Hatzvi-Bais. It was the 12th year of the first cycle that began on Yud Shvat of Tafshin Yud, 1950. So, Proti Hadvorim Inyan Ha'itzer L'maylo. Some details about this Eitzer above. The Eitzer means the treasures, and these are the treasures after the Frierdiker Rebbe tells us that this whole process of Basi Legani, of creating a gan for Hashem here in this world, that whole process means that we are engaging in Amal Chaver. It's a battle, and it is through the battle. And the victory of the battle is the bringing the Shekhinah here to this world. Okay, that's the victory of the battle. So this is the mashal that the Frierdiker Rebbe is elaborating on. He's using that to explain this process of Lasis Yisborich Dir B'Tachtei. So he mentions that the Shames Yisrael, who are the Chayol, and they are the Tzivos, they refer to as Tzivos Hashem, they are the soldiers who are carrying out this battle, right? And the Melech, meaning the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Eibishter Hashem, is providing the Chayolim with the means to be victorious. Okay? So the Frierdiker Rebbe begins the chapter. Yud Beis V'dei La'ov in Inyan Ha'itzer L'maylo. In order to understand what exactly is this Eitzer, what are these treasures that Hashem taps into these treasures, right? And he makes it available to the Neshamas Yisrael, who are the Tzivos Hashem, so that they, enabling them to fight the battle and to prevail in the battles. So before the Rebbe goes in to what the Frierdiker Rebbe then is going on to say about this Eitzer, the Rebbe says that the Frierdiker Rebbe, as a hakdama to this chapter, he says the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to answer some questions that you'll have when you focus on the mashal that the Frierdiker Rebbe is using. Okay? Move on. Using this mashal of a king with treasures, tapping into these treasures and making them available to the soldiers. So first we have to understand, what does that even mean that Hashem has treasures? And such a treasure house that is similar to, as in the mashal, that the king is reluctant to tap into these preserved treasures. What does that mean?
What's that?
Well, yeah. How do we understand that in the nimshal? What does that mean? I mean, the mashal is pretty descriptive, and it's something that we can imagine, right? Well, how do we apply that to the nimshal meaning Hashem making available something to the Neshamas Yisrael in order to make the Deren. Kivan Shechasalov, and we're talking about a certain Eitzer, that the king is reluctant to tap into it because Chas Alav, and here the Rabbi uses a Yiddish term, Jalavet. Jalavet means that you are very protective of it. I mean, we use the word Jalavet sometimes in a somewhat of a negative context. Vos Jalavistu, like you're holding the mashke, you're being a little protective, you're hoarding it, right? Make it available. Vos Jalavistu, yeah? Okay, so the Rebbe used that term to say that from the mashal, it seems that the king has a noitzer, but at Jalavit, he doesn't want to make it just available. He's reserving it. Yosef, the reason for not making it free and available is because we're talking about, again, in the description of the mashal, it's something that was collected from generations and generations. And it is so precious that it's even more precious than the basic needs of the king. Why? Because we said in the mashal that for the tzorchei hamelech he doesn't necessarily tap. He has a budget for that. The budget is very calculated, and there could be certain tzorachim that he'll be willing to sacrifice because they're not in the budget, right? But not with this oitzer. This oitzer, being that it is being fueled by the nitzachim of the melech, it's a different kind of a battle. It's not just about waging a battle in order to make sure that the country has its needs, right? Or the king has his needs. Rather, it's a battle which is fueled by the midah of nitzachim, to be victorious. So this whole thing, says the Rebbe, is not understood, which is why the Fidik is going to go on with an elaborate description of what this Eitzer is, right? How could you possibly say, when we apply this mashal to Hashem, that is first of all something that the king needs, and these are basic needs, right? Okay. And in spite of that, we're talking about the Melech Malchi Amlach, right? Oh, but they're just basic needs. There's limits as to how far we're going to go to meet those needs. And therefore, so these Eitzeres, those hidden treasures, they're going to remain locked and put away. However, when the Melech has a certain desire, and to him it's important that he's victorious, now already we're talking about these Eitzers that we're not going to be tapped into for the basic needs, right? So says the Rebbe, the question is, how could it be that there's something called the Tzorchei HaMelech, which we're not going to touch the Eitzer, and then there's something that's even beyond the Tzorchei HaMelech, and then we will tap into this Eitzer, right? And this Eitzer apparently is even more than the Tzorchei HaMelech, the needs of the king. And therefore, we're not going to tap into this Eitzer for the basic needs. But on the other hand, with a menagid, meaning that now it's about being victorious, something, a force that is actually opposing the king, right? And this is a very key word over here, especially when you think about the mashal. What's the mashal? The mashal is that the Shechina has given a order, so to speak. He has given a mission to the Teves Hashem, the Neshamas Yisrael, that they have to go into a place, right? And that place is this Olam Hazeh HaTachton. This Olam Hazeh HaTachton is a place of darkness. It's a place that could even be menagid. It's actually a place that naturally, on its own, it seems to be in opposition to the king. And in order to bring the Shechina in that place, we're talking about the kind of Milchama where Hashem is faced with a menagid. And when faced with a menagid, from the Mashal, we know that the king is now, it's the Geya B'Nafshi. It's something that's so deeply important to him, right? And it calls out that need the called nitzachim, right? Because I poischim esaitzim hastunim, So he opens up all of these hidden treasures, right? In order to enable the soldiers to be victorious in a place over a situation and an atmosphere and a place which is minagit elikus, which seems to be rejecting this shchina. So for this, the Friedrich Rebbe goes on to explain in order to understand this oitzer that he brings up previously as the origin of these special koiches that are given to every neshama in order to accomplish the mission of Basi Legani. Where he explains it, he's now going to focus on something that is mentioned in the Tikkunei Zohar. So the Tikkunei Zohar is a part of the Zohar, right? It's not part of the regular Seder of the Zohar, Brachos, Shvan, the Parshas, but it's a separate sefer called Tikkunei Zohar, which is also from the Rabbi. I think I read somewhere that there's maybe some controversy as to who's the author of the Tikkunei Zohar, but from the Mikubalim, it's clear that they all accepted that the Tikkunei Zohar was also from the Rabbi. We'll see later in the Maamar of the Rebbe quotes from a sefer called Yonas Elam, right, from the Rameh. And because I had to prepare this Maamar, so I had to go look and see in the sources. And he says the Pashtus, he actually says, as the Rabbi expresses, okay? What does it say in the Tikkunei Zohar? So it's speaking about Hashem. Now we mentioned last week how the Zohar, when referring to Hashem, it refers to Hashem as the Orient Source. Hashem, the infinite light. All throughout the Zohar, this is the term that's used in the Zohar for Hashem, the infinite light. Okay. Now this is typical for the Zohar to use Hatzvi-Bais, which are, as we say, purely metaphorical. Okay. Or the fancy word anthropomorphous, basically using certain characteristics that apply to human beings and then projecting them and applying them to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Okay. So the Zohar is all obviously full of that. I mentioned, for example, that throughout we want to speak about the midas, right? Not the Chachma Binodas, but the lower midas. What are they called? They're called Zoh. Right now, Chassidus actually uses the Rosh Teves of Zoh, right? But most people don't actually even know when they're learning Chassidus what Zoh actually stands for, right? And it's kind of in a way maybe good that they don't know, right? Because as the Tzemach, I mentioned this also last week, the Tzemach Tzedek says that when learning Kabbalah, because Kabbalah uses such metaphorical terms, human terms, so to speak, there has to be a zehirus. You have to be extremely careful to realize that we're not talking about these things as appears, but rather what do they represent? What is the concept? What do they mean conceptually, right? So yeah, Zoh is definitely a term that's used, right? But you know what? I mean, this is really my own. What I'm noticing on my own is that you don't spell it out. You don't say Ze'er Anpin, little faces, right? Because when you're learning Chassidus, your mind is already not focusing on little faces. Your mind automatically, you see Zoh, and you see Hamshach Zoh in Malchus, right? Or Zoh Benukvin, Zun, right? You don't think Zoh, you don't think Nukvin, you think the Midos of Hashem, right? Which is a conceptual thing, right? Especially if you follow the Zehiras of the Tzemach Tzedek, which is also necessarily even when learning Chassidus. But it's much less likely that it'll get distorted because, as I said, Chassidus actually makes an effort to use more abstract language, right? So automatically, any Talmud, any person, any Bacher in Yeshiva learning a Maamar, and you see Zoh Benukvin, right away he knows it's Amshach the Midas. But the Midas are now going to affect the Biyad. They're going to have an effect that will be Nimshach also the of Bria Yetzirah, right? Okay. Yet, interestingly, even in Chassidus, when we speak about the Eibishter, we speak about Hashem himself, we don't use an abstract term. We actually borrow the term from Zohar. and we stick with that term, or Ein Sof, right? The infinite light. It's a metaphor. Okay. But in the Zohar itself, there's a description of this infinite light. But it's a description as far as why we're describing it as infinite. Says the Zohar, or Ein Sof, it's the infinite light because it's the Ma'ila ad Ketz, it's infinitely high, Olamato ad Ein Tachlis, and it's infinitely low. Okay. You have to be careful when you say that it's infinitely low, because usually when we see something is low, it's you say, oh, it's how low can you get, right? No, that's not the pshat. The pshat is that its reach is infinite, that it reaches everywhere, right? Even the places that are the lowest of places. Not that Chas v'Shalom, the Or is infinitely low. It's not infinitely low. It's infinite, but because it's infinite, it's therefore it reaches infinitely high and it reaches infinitely low. So this is a description of the Rabbi himself, and I say I'm quoting it near the Rabbi because I'm following, because the Menachem Azaria, the author of the Sefer Yed Nasalem, actually says it in the name of the Rabbi.
I think your back's covered.
I'm covered. Right.
Yes. Hey, yes. When you say it's infinite, are we talking about like a ray, or should we not envision a ray that's infinite?
Array is actually a good term, because it's almost synonymous with ziv, which I think ziv translates more as array. So often in Chassidus, when speaking about the Or Ein Sof, it's ha'or v'ziv, right? Especially when you speak about the tzimtzum, or you speak about the distinction between or and shame, right? It says shame is beyond, or is already a bechina from ziv, right? Like you say, like array, where shame is even higher and it's not even a ziv. Okay, but that's already whatever. Yeah, I guess you can. Yes, or actually seems to be synonymous with ray, with ziv. Okay. But here in this next chapter of the Rebbe, we're going to discover some very fundamental ways of understanding the Or Ein Sof, dafke al pi Chassidus. How Chassidus treats this reference to Hashem himself. Chassidus itself uses that reference when talking about Hashem. And yet, there's going to be a very fundamental understanding of what this means when we say Or Ein Sof, as opposed to what the term that's used, Atzvos U'Behosti Etzel. Okay, and it's going to very much tie in, especially because the description that's used is Ein Sof, and the description in the Zohar goes even farther to say that it's Ein Sof L'maylo and it's Ein Sof L'mato, right? You put the two together, then you have to come to the conclusion that we're talking about the Or and not the Etzem, because this whole discussion that cannot even apply to Atzvos U'Behosti. Okay, but before we go further, so now we have the Rebbe's summary of the Maamar up until chapter Hatzvi-Bais. We have the summary. We spent the first 2 weeks doing that, right? Now we have the Rebbe's Hakdama to what the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to do in Perek Hatzvi-Bais, right? In Perek Hatzvi-Bais, the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to kind of like go off into something, I would call it maybe going off on a tangent, but it's not, right? I mean, it could be argued that it's a tangent, even because it ends up that what the Frierdiker Rebbe is going to focus on in this description is really only for contrast, because that's not going to be the Yotze. He is going to focus on the Or that's L'mato ad Ein Tachlis. That's going to be the whole Perek Hatzvi-Bais on the Or that's L'mato ad Ein Tachlis, right? And in the end, it's going to be, but this Yotze, as great as this infinite seems to be, it's an amazing degree of infinite in describing the Or Ein Sof. That's not the Yotze though. So the whole Hatzvi-Bais is about focusing on something where next year, Amitzvah Hashem, we're going to say, well, 1 second. Hey, that was great. The Yotze, right? No. The Yotze, that's not the Yotze. The Yotze has to do more with the Or, the Milo ad Ein Ketz. Okay? So what we'll do now is we're going to go back to the original Maamar of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So you just have to turn back one page to page Tes. And I'm sorry, no, that's the beginning of the Rebbe's Maamar. Back 2 pages to page Zayin. And let's read the words of the Friedrich Rebbe. Now, they're going to be somewhat difficult. I'm saying that for me at least, right? This is one of those cases where I followed the advice of another mashpia. I mentioned something that I had learned from Rabbi Khan, but I had another mashpia that made the and this was 11 years ago, Toshen Lamed Aleph, when we were learning the Maamar that the Rebbe had said, not Toshen Lamed Aleph, we were learning the Maamar of Toshen Lamed Aleph, right? Okay, so it was the first year of the cycle, so 11 years ago. I found that Maamar to be extremely, extremely difficult. So I was at a Simcha, New Jersey, and I started Melech Tzivul there, and it was a couple of weeks before Yud Shvat, and I said, "Vos tut min the Maamar? How do you teach this Maamar?" Right? It seemed it was beyond what I felt I was capable. So he told me very simply. He said, "Du kennst the Ivre? Can you teach the words?" So just translate the words. That's all. Just these other words. Translate the words, and that's it. You've done your job. So I'll translate the words. I'll try to do a little more perhaps than just translating the words. Okay. So says the Friedrich Rebbe. Oh, to understand this Eitzer, and here he's going to go off into a whole different thing. We find in the Kodei Zohar that the Ein Sof, Hashem himself, the infinite light, in order to describe what it means it's infinite, it is higher, infinitely high, and and it can reach infinitely low. And here's the Friedrich Rebbe is focusing on the second. When we say that this R is infinite, that it goes to infinitely low place, hakavana, what does that mean? Not chas v'sholem that the Eibishter is low, right? The where can the Eibishter reach out, right? Where can he reveal himself? This R, it can reveal himself in infinite degrees, even totally and completely infinite. Even to places where you can't even imagine, right? Because they seem to be so low. The Shem Orin Sof. This is why the term, when talking about Hashem, is Or Ein Sof, the light that is infinite. Says the Friedrich Rebbe, and here the Friedrich Rebbe is speaking based on a background. What is the background? The background is that Chassidus already explained that when you use the term Or Ein Sof, you're talking about a light that's emanating from Hashem. That's what the term Or means, right? Or you could use perhaps the term a reflection of Hashem, right? Says the Friedrich Rebbe, when the Zohar calls us the Or Ein Sof. Now, this is notwithstanding the fact that we don't find that the Zohar addresses this distinction, just refers to Hashem as the Or Ein Sof. But Chassidus that does address this distinction, right? So you may think that when it says Or Ein Sof, you can translate it's the Or emanating from the infinite. Says the Friedrich Rebbe, no. When we say that the Or Ein Sof is l'mayla den ketz, and even l'mata den tachlis, ha'or atzma hu Ein Sof. That element of the infinite is in the Or itself. In the Or. What's the reason that we conclude that the Or itself is Ein Sof, not that it's just a reflection of something else? That's Ein Sof, the Eretz. The Or is an exact reflection of its source, the Maamar, the source of the light. Okay. Now, this description of Or is actually one of the descriptions that's used in Chassidus to justify why Chassidus sticks with that metaphor, right? There's a Maamar from the Friedrich Rebbe, for example. I think I mentioned already last week, where the Friedrich Rebbe actually enumerates 5 or maybe 6 qualities that you observe in simple physical light. Okay, light is a very intriguing thing, even on in its physical state. Right? Forget about the metaphor that it's used for. Okay, one of the things is that what is light? Light is a reflection. What is a reflection? It's a perfect reflection of what it is reflecting. I think I mentioned last week. You look in the mirror, right? You're not in the mirror, but you're seeing a perfect reflection of you. Everything, every quality about what is being projected to the mirror is being projected back to you, right? Why is that? Because the R, one of the qualities of R is that it is only what the Ma'ar is and nothing else. Actually, when I worded it that way, I'm actually already including another description about R, is that it doesn't have any mitzias of itself, right? It doesn't have any of its own. Now, one of the ways to demonstrate that is that if somebody projects a light, right, and that light already went from here to there, right, immediately, if you put something in front of the light, right, what happens to the light that's beyond that? Gone. It's not there, right? Because you didn't actually send anything there. All you did was you sent a reflection of what's here. You didn't send anything over there. Now I understand that if you have a mind, a scientific mind, you're going to make that argument that that's not necessarily the case. Fine, okay. But as a marshal, we don't necessarily have to stick with every little thing. It certainly appears that way, right? It's by perception for sure. But there'll be those that will even argue that even scientifically, that's not the case. It was what's I found when I was in yeshiva in Seattle. So we had someone who was had just started becoming frum, whatever. He was actually becoming frum, like he was going like really quick, right? And he had, I don't know exactly, where he was in the world of physics, but he knew enough. And he came up with this idea. Well, basically, it was based on the idea that from the light's perspective, there actually is no life doesn't experience time and space. Light itself does not experience time and space, right? Whatever. So based on all of this, he wanted to explain that even scientifically, that element of the marshal is true. Okay, but the yod is made about. This is one of the intriguing things about R, which is why it was a favored metaphor to use, right? In spite of the fact that it's not the essence, it's only Hara, meaning that it's actually nothing, right? All it is just a reflection of something else. That's what gives it its preferred status. Because then it means that it's going to be an exact reflection of the Mar, of the source of the light. So since that which is reflecting is the Atzvos, what do we know about the Atzvos? And here the Fidigebe actually uses a term that's more used in Chassidus, which is Pshitos, right? I mean, you could have just said Ein Sof, right? But Ein Sof already is a description, and it's already a little bit too descriptive. But Pshitos is the word itself is saying that we're talking about something that actually defies any description. That's what the word pshitos means. Pshitos means the ultimate abstraction, not even a relative abstraction. The ultimate pshitos. The etzem is the ultimate pshitos. No description whatsoever, even the description of no description. It's the ultimate hashut. This is actually one of the words. This is the word that the Tzemach Tzedek uses in Deren that when you learn Kabbalah, you have to be mafshit hadvarim megashmius. Go to the concept. When you go to the concept, you're separating it from whatever the metaphor is not doing full justice to. Okay? So since the Atzvos itself is pshitos and Ein Sof, the R which is reflecting the etzem, it's a perfect reflection. It also has to be reflecting the Ein Sof. Says the Friedrich Rebbe, when you read and you use the word and you refer to Hashem as being the infinite light, you're talking about light. But that light itself has within it the quality of the infinite, being that it has everything that the Mar projects through it. Therefore, to now he's going to actually is going to address the idea that it's lamata mata de tachlis, that these are so infinite that it's lamata mata de tachlis, that ma'ora zeh hoyo oilam esesfiris adin ketzu b'ligvul klal. Therefore, this are, first of all, has the capacity within it to create, right? Because again, if the absolute Eibishter could create, so the Ein Sof, the term used to describe the Eibishter, has within it also the capacity to create. So the Ein Sof can create. It's all part. That's what's in the bar. So that's what's in there, right? But when it creates, right, it could create to such an extent that it creates infinite elements and infinite spheres. Now, if you look, what's it doing to elements and spheres, by the way? Just as a little sidebar. The other ways I will translate as being degrees of existence. Okay, so the physical world is just a degree of existence, but you have higher degrees of existence. And generally speaking, in Chassidus, it's called the four worlds of Atzilos, Bria, Yetzira, and Asif. Okay. Dimensions. Okay. Well. Before you get to dimensions, actually, I'll save that word for the spheres. Okay, I'll say that for the spheres. So elements are degrees of existence, right? But within the degrees of existence, you have spheres. You have all different features within that world, right? And those, the Ori itself can produce them infinitely, right? And it is so infinite that there doesn't even have to be a common denominator between one element and another element. Completely distinct one from the other. That which is resulted from the Ein Sof that creates the worlds, right? They themselves become believable. They have within themselves the element of the believable. It's almost as if we're saying that the worlds that are created by the Ein Sof are also reflecting the Ein Sof, and therefore they have within them also the element of the ultimate infinite.
Reflection over reflection.
Right. So levad zeh believable b'misparim. Besides that, it's infinite in number, right? That would be a quantitative thing about infinite. Like it says, repeating in the spheres, ain't cats. It says that there are spheres. That in other words, the spheres would be what was the word you used? Dimensions. There may be infinite dimensions, okay, but that would be mathematically speaking, right? A quantitative infinite. But they have within themselves the quality of the infinite. So, like for example, when we speak about chesed of Atzilus, on the one hand it's chesed, right? But that chesed itself is a believable chesed. It's an infinite chesed. Okay, we're playing around a lot now with the term infinite, and this would be where we really could use the expertise of a chassid that lived here in Pittsburgh, Yehuda, literally, because he studied. Did you know him, Avram? Did you? You know Tzvi. Are you here when you came to? Okay. Well, Tzvi Yehuda had a PhD in mathematics, and one of the things that he had studied was the math of a certain mathematician called Cantor from Germany, not even a Yid. But he revolutionized the whole concept of infinite. As a matter of fact, there's what is created a new symbol, right, in mathematics, and you'll see them in your secular math book on the cover, right, an aleph, and then you have an aleph with a zero, but the zero is not like you put a zero where you have a number and you want to say it to the power, right? So you want to say 5 to the second power, the third power, you put it over there, you put it on the block. So it's aleph, and the term that's used, I have no idea what this means, but it's aleph to the sub zero. And now I discovered there's the aleph to the sub 1, the aleph to the sub 2, the aleph to the sub 3, whatever that means, okay? But this is, so this is, we're using infinite. We're talking about infinite quantitatively. We're talking about infinite qualitatively, right? It's not just infinite b'mispar, it's also infinite also as well in mahus, right? It has an infinite mahus. Okay.
Created 10 and not 11.
Yes, that's later on in this. That's later. That's the tzimtzum. But rather than go further in this sif, let's go back to the Rebbe's Maamar. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it's very likely we'll never get to that part of the Maamar where the Rebbe is masbir but it's the symptom element in this whole process, okay? Of Eser v'Leitesha, Eser v'Leichadas. Yes, you're going to learn it, I know for sure. But I don't think we're going to cover it here in this shiur. So rather than go further, let's just leave it at that. This is the ice that the Rebbe now turn up 2 pages ahead. The ice Gimel and the Rebbe's Maamar of Hatzvi-Bais. And here the Rebbe is going to elaborate on what the Friedrich Rebbe just said. That the Or itself is Ein Sof. The Or itself, which is Or, as opposed to the Etzem, itself has within it the quality of the infinite. And it indeed even produces infinite worlds by number and infinite in essence. So Gimel. Hinei, v'hinei bazel, hinei b'inyan Or Ein Sof, yesh shtei perushim. So when we say the Or Ein Sof, page at Aleph, Ois Gimel. There are 2 ways to translate Or Ein Sof. Pirush ha'Aleph, or Shel Ein Sof. It's the light emanating from the infinite. But Pirush ha'Beis, Shar Atzmahu Ein Sof. That the Or itself has the quality of the infinite. So Maamar b'Maamar, so the Friedrich Rebbe goes on and he explains in the Maamar, as we just finished learning, right now when it says that the Or Ein Sof is L'mayla Adin Ketz, L'mata Adin Tachlis, Hakavona Hi Sha'ar Atzmahu B'Chinas Ein Sof. That's a description of the Or itself. It is infinitely high, and the Or is infinitely low. Right, but we're focusing, and especially in the context of this Maamar HaZohar, right? The description of the Zohar itself as to why we call Hashem the infinite light, because he is infinitely high and is infinitely low. The Or is infinitely high and infinitely low, and says the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe points out that the Friedrich Rebbe is telling us that that's an indication that the Or itself has the quality of the Ein Sof. Now the Rebbe is going to explain it. This is Medrash, how you're going to learn how Chassidus Chabad approaches this inyan, right? And the Rebbe gives us an amazing beer as to why you have to say that that's what it means. Okay? Okay. If you look at it honestly, says the Rebbe, Haloshin Ein Sof, just by using the term Ein Sof, Ein Sof is not even a description that you use on the Eretz. So just by virtue of the fact that Zohar is calling the Eibishter infinite, right? It has to be that it's referring to the Or and not to the Eretz, right? Can't refer to the Eretz as to the Eretz. You can't even refer to it as Ein Sof. You have to say that it has within it the capacity of the Ein Sof because it's the Eretz, right? But you can't even refer to it. When could you start referring to Hashem as being infinite? You know when you can refer to Hashem as being infinite? When you're talking about the Or of the Eibishter. On a higher level, there's also a term that's used that's in a sense even higher than the Or, and that's the term Shem. But there are certain common denominators between the 2 terms of Shem and Or. Okay? Ein Sof apparently seems to be more compatible with Or, even more than the Shem. But the Shem again is also a description, right? I mean, where you see the difference is you say that Eibishter's Or and Ziv is mispashet, it goes everywhere, right? But when it comes to Shem, the term Shem is actually reserved to a matzav of Kaita Matzin Tzom, when it was Hu Ushmai Bilvat. But it was Hu Ushmai Bilvat. So Shmai, in one sense, is higher than Or, because it's right. It's not even subject to the Tzimtzum. It's Hu Ushmai Bilvat, right? But at the same time, it also has a common denominator with the Or, right? And it lends itself to some kind of a description, but the Etzem doesn't lend itself to any kind of description.
In other words, what, like one's at you, people going out, but something going home.
I mean, the Rebbe's maamarim, if we gather the Or, the Etzem Or, this Pashtus Or, I mean, he could take apart Or, but we're speaking of any very general terms right now. You mean as far as the distinction between Or and Shem? Okay, but whatever. We're not going to get into that. Move over the Kuti Torah. The reason is because this maamar is a hanoch, right? So apparently this hanocha was redone. That's plain and simple. So the reason why you have the original hanocha, but over the, I don't know if it was done just now, maybe for this year, but the hanocha was redone. Once the Rebbe's magia maamar, you don't touch it. I mean, that's the Rebbe's. No, this maamar was always hanocha. It was never, the Rebbe was never magia. So when they so whatever, they had more resources, or they went and they heard the tape again, or whatever. I don't know what they did, but it's that's a common thing that when they prepare a hanacha, right? They'll redo the hanacha, like they'll see that, oh wait, this hanacha, the Rebbe wasn't making so it was never even making in the first place prepared on the level that they would prepare a maamar that they were hoping that the Rebbe would be making. Okay. So now, I guess, in their mindset, it's almost as if, let's assume that we're getting this maamar ready for the Rebbe to be making, right? And one of the things, they would make a special effort to make the Rebbe's work as little as possible, right? And over the years, they got the sense of how the Rebbe wanted things done, so he didn't have to, put in as much time, to making corrections and so on and so on. So yeah, that happens with the Hanukkah. Okay. So move in order to make this point. So the Rebbe is going to refer to something that's in Likutei Torah, Pashas Pekudei. Now, Pashas Pekudei, you would expect that it's in Torah because it's a Chumash, but no. Pekudei was it made it only into Likutei Torah before we begin with Vayikra. Okay, so it's in Likutei Torah. I will mention here that one of the things about the maamarim that the Rebbe would say, Basi Legani, right, is that in the maamar, the Rebbe would mention something, he would quote something from all of the Rabbeim, from the Alter Rebbe down, and then maybe, perhaps, I don't know if this was in every maamar for all the years, but going to the Yitzchok and the Baal Shem Tov as well. Okay? Now, if this is the reference, I'm not sure. And I'm thinking not. They didn't really go carefully through the maamar to see if there's another reference to the Alter Rebbe, but I'm going to say probably not, because what the Rebbe is going to quote now from Likutei Torah is actually an apprentices of Likutei Torah. And the apprentices of Likutei Torah are generally the Ha'aris of the Tzemach Tzedek. And in this case, it almost has to be, because in Likutei Torah and apprentices, it makes reference to the Sefer Plach and as we'll soon see. The Plach was written by a Chassid who was already a Chassid in times of the Alter Rebbe, but it was mostly by the Mikla Rebbe, and this was the Chassid, Rabbi Lubavitch, right? So it can't be that these are the words of the original Maamar of the Alter Rebbe. This is in the parentheses, which is the surface of the Tzemach Tzedek. What does it say in Likutei Torah, Pashas Pekudei? It says, Mashehikshe Harame, right? The Rameh was Menachem Azari, I think, right? Abu Kubel in the 1500s, I think. Bahagdoma, Besefer Yenas Elam. He wrote a sefer called Yenas Elam in this Hagdoma, and it's also brought the Sefer Placharim from Rabbi Lubavitch. Now, before I go, because I'm giving the shiur, so I had a responsibility to check a little bit the background of what this is all about. So what it is basically the Rameh brings a kasha that the Baal HaYikarim has on the Rambam. So the Baal HaYikarim, Rabbi Yosef Albai, right, who wrote a sefer of the Ikarei Hadas, the Ramuna, right, and he is chaylik on the Rambam a lot. Okay, the Baal HaYikarim. Here the Rameh came to defend the Rambam. What was the kasha? So the kasha is Loma Nikra or Ein Sof. Why is Hashem even referred to with this metaphor as the infinite light? It would seem that you'd be doing more justice by calling Hashem that he has no beginning, right? Which indeed, this is actually not from the Rebbe, but the next part is actually from the Rebbe. Now, kadma is a term that the Rambam uses. Hakel Yisale hu kadma. That's how the Rambam describes the Eibshter, that he's a kadma. What means a kadma? A kadma means that nothing precedes him, right? So everything else that we know that we can identify as a beginning, right? Except for Hashem, no beginning, right? So the Balahi Karim says is on the Rambam. Why are you saying he's Kadmon? Why don't you say he's Nitzchi? Say that he's eternal. Right? Comes the Rambam, and the Rambam says no. He's defending the Rambam, and he says if you look carefully, you'll see that the Rambam chose the word Kadmon very carefully. Why? Because if he's a Kadmon, he has to be a Nitzchi. If he has no beginning, then he has to be eternal. If nobody told him when to begin, nobody can tell him when to stop, so to speak, right? Okay. But says the Rambam, there could be something that's actually Nitzchi, right? It's eternal, but ain't Kadmon, but it's not necessarily Kadmon. Why? The fish has cholim hanivdolim. This is the term that's actually used in the Rameh. Those scholim nivdolim is, I think, a term. It's like more you see it in Kabbalah than in Chassidus. It's a term that's referencing creatures other than Hashem, like malachim or whatever, right? So they're called the scholim hanivdolim. We find this sichlim hanivdolim, schol hanivdolim, right? And if you look in 26, it's actually the way the Plach Harima quotes this Rameh. He changes the word and he uses a term that we're more familiar with. He says, there are certain creatures created in this world, Shehem Nitzchi, and they are eternal. Why are they eternal? That's why Hashem wanted to create them. He creates things, as we said before, that the that it's a mata dein tachlis means that his pashness is the mata dein tachlis, and it creates eilamis, and these eilamis could be eilamis of Yitzchok. Right? So there are things that Hashem chose to create that they should have nitzchis. The shemesh is actually the example. Again, don't try to pass this by a critical scientist, right? What do they know exactly? Right? Even though we're talking about something that was actually created, right? Right? They do have a tchila. Why do they have a tchila? Because they didn't always exist. They're not a kadmon, but they could have the quality of a nitzch. Right? Says the Rameh. So that's why the Rambam chose Kadmon, okay? But based on this, we have a big kasha then. Why is this Kabbalah, and also with the adopted term that's always used for Hashem, that is the Ein Sof? Would be better to say is the Ein L'Tchila, like the Rambam did and defended by the Rameh with a perfect logic. That's the why, right? So the Mashon Kaira makes sense. So why do we refer to the Eibishter as the Ein Sof?
How do you reflect that?
What? Kadmon used the Rambam used the perfect word. Kadmon. Oh, so the Rabbi gives his tenets. He gives the tenets. He explains it. He says because by using Ein Sof, I just went through this very quickly, but he says that that's a term that we can be masig. We cannot be masig in with chila. And he gives an example. He says if somebody was locked up in a room, right? He might know that there's something outside of the room, but he has absolutely no idea what's outside of the room. He only knows what's in the room. Take him outside and introduce him to what's outside of the room. So he'll know what's outside the room, but what's beyond that, he has actually, there's no way, there's nothing that he could have in his own mind to grasp that which is beyond. So the tenets of the Rameh is that the reason we use the term Ein Sof is not because it's the best term. The Rambam has the best term. But the reason why we use Ein Sof is simply because it's Lefi Hasogasim. It's something that we can actually wrap our minds around. Okay? What? Yeah, Pshitas is hard, but Ein Sof is something we can. Okay. Chassidus says it. I don't know. Maybe it could be in the words of the Rameh, but Chassidus takes a different approach. What do you mean? Of course, it's our Ein Sof. Because the time we're not trying to explain the Atmos of Mahos. We're not trying to explain Hashem himself. We're just giving him a name. By giving him a name, that means we're referencing something that we have some kind of again, I guess you can say that what the Rameh meant, we have some kind of a saga. It's a reference that we are using for Hashem. Right? And that reference is we're talking about that which Hashem is projecting and he's allowing us to know. He's allowing us to know that what? That he is Ein Sof. Shein Leisov. I don't know how much he's allowing us to know that he's in the Kadmon. That he is a Kadmon.
It says that our perception of ourselves existing as a true yesh, that's how he let us know that.
Very good. That actually comes up later in the Maamar. Also, by the way, that's talked about in the Mitler Rabbi, right? The Dafki in the Yesh HaNivra, the Bet Nisgale. You can have an appreciation to the Yesh HaBayra. You could, yeah. And the Yesh HaBayra is Nisgale Dafki in the Yesh HaNivra.
No illumination.
Yeah, I'm not that kind of Yesh.
Yeah, but as a yesh,
Yeah.
we have a better muscle.
Yeah. The Seraphim, the Chayes HaKodesh, they find the Chayes HaKodesh, Baraj Godel, right? Already are starting to feel a particular yesh. That's why it's Baraj Godel, as it says, right? Yeah. The Seraphim, you could say, don't even know what it means to be a yesh, right? Because it's Benachas, right? But the Chayes HaKodesh, they build the Chayes, right? They push the Baraj Godel. Why? Because of yesh.
It's very different than a person's yesh. A person can think himself as the only yesh, separated from the yesh. So
Obviously, it's not the same as a person. Yes, David.
It's a better muscle for the
David.
If a ship is beyond no category, it's different that a ship is really beyond the category of yesh.
And that, yes.
And but because like for our Bennett condition.
Exactly. Okay. So since we're not referring to the Atzos, I'm also referring only to the Yard. So that's why when you're talking about the Yard doesn't have a Tchila. What's the Tchila? The Mar. So what's the term that we're going to use? What can we say about Arbaziv? Shein Leisaf. We're saying that this R that's emanating, it's the reflection of Hashem, so to speak, right? Perfect reflection. It has all the qualities of what it's reflecting, right? But since we're saying it has absolutely no hagbola, so by using this description in desire, we're saying that these are about which yesh leitchil, right? But at the same time, it's Ein Sof. It's infinite, and it's infinite in its highness, and it's infinite where it can go in even the cheshech, the lowest places of Eilam. Okay.
Is he arguing on the Rambam, or is he simply saying the Rambam's talking about Atmos and we're talking about?
Does the Korim argue on the Rambam? Yeah.
In other words, is he arguing on the Rambam, or maybe the Rambam?
Who arguing on the Rambam?
In other words, when we're talking about that is a better term than Kadmon. Maybe
No. Kadmon is a term.
He's talking about us.
For sure.
We're talking about
But since we are using the term Ar Ein Sof, right? That means we're dafki using the term Ein Sof because it's something about which we don't want to say Kadmon. Right? That's what Moses Kadmon, but we don't want to say on the other that it's Kadmon. The Chayre, though, and I'll leave just with this question because you just ran out of time. The Chayre, you should say that the Yar being Ein Hamor, the Chayre should reflect also the Kadmon should be more. Okay, but that already I'll leave to the grace of God.
And also in Chassidus, why do we then call Atmos Ein Sof?
Right. In other words, why are we so easily saying that the Yod has within it the quality of yesh to create yesh b'ayin, or it has the quality of Ein Sof. Has the quality of Ein Sof, it could even create yesh b'ayin, right? Why? Because it's Mar Mein Amar. It's reflecting the Mar. If it's in the Mar, it has to be in the Yod, right?
That you can understand in the mashal a little bit, because a mirror, if I put a mirror in front of me, it's exactly you. The second I move that mirror, it's gone already.
Okay, whatever. But I'm saying if we just follow the same logic, right? That if the Yod is a perfect reflection, why doesn't the Yod also? Okay, whatever. I mean, it could be that it's discussed. Yeah. But the bottom line is that we're definitely talking about the Ein Sof, but the Ein Sof the way it is in the Yod, and that's why we're using Ein Sof, and we're not using Ein Sof because it's in the Yod as opposed. And even in that Yod, which is the Yod, it's still Ein Sof. It still has the and it is Ein Sof ba'atzmi. Not that it's reflecting the Ein Sof. It is Ein Sof as a quality of its.
You said there's a definition. One is it comes from the Atzmos.
Right.
There is the Ein, so that comes from the Atzmos.
Right.
Point where before it was the Atzmos.
By definition, yes. Right. So that's it's in the definition that it is R. Right, so by definition, it's R and not the Mar. Okay, so then it's by definition, you cannot use the term cut. Yeah, okay, so you cannot, yeah, but you know what? Yeah.
And it has all the reflections.
Good. You know what? Maybe what's it called? Maybe there is the element of the cut, right? Because as we get towards the end of the mind, we'll find out that the and it's infinitely low is a type. What's that? That's infinitely low. The fact that there can be a place that's benaged to the that could only be from the infinite, like you said, like the Yesh Hanivra is the perfect example, right? The only thing we have that's similar. What the only thing that we have that's similar to the Eibishter is something that screams that he's himself a Kadosh, right? That he himself is a Kadosh, right? I don't need God to create me. I was always here, right? My cells were always there, or whatever, my DNA, whatever, right? But yeah. Okay, so a gute Nacht.